Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to one and all to the sixth day of the Kurla Varki Design Forum. I am Ahana and I will be the host for today's evening. This year's theme for the forum, Response, Conflict, Response, intends to stimulate conversations on and around various responses, out of which emerges conflict, which can be seen as constructive catalysts for provoking responses rather than something undesirable. The shortlist of projects identify a set of design approaches that represent a diverse range of concerns, schools of thought, modes of representation, and act as catalysts for a multifaceted and enriching discussion. With this, we begin the session on the third subtopic, conflict of human nature. Our engagement with nature needs re-examination in favor of a symbiotic one. How then can we shift the narrative of our imagination to acknowledge the notion of time and regeneration and not merely of use? To engage with us for an insightful discussion on this sub-theme, we have with us today Sopan Joshi. Sopan Joshi is a reporter, writer, and editor. He holds a master's degree in English literature. Joshi has traveled to several parts of India and the world researching on environment, agriculture, water management, forestry, and livestock, among other things. His book, Jal Thermal, explores the science and history of sanitation with a social and environmental perspective. Robert Powell. Robert Powell is a practitioner, academician, writer, whose architecture and master planning is driven by a strong emphasis on the respect for the existing ecology, reinforcing biodiversity and establishing a network of habitats. He was formerly the project director and head of Eco-Master Planning with Lewin Davis Young. Prior to that, he was an associate professor in the School of Architecture at NUS. Robert Powell has authored and edited more than 30 books on architecture, mainly on Southeast Asia. Kunjan Garg. Kunjan co-founded the firm Mangrove Architecture Alliance with architect Raj Menon in the year 2006, which later amalgamated with the design tree of architect Niranjan Das Sharma to form RGB Architecture Studio, a critical practice based in Cochin that strives to articulate context-sensitive architecture amidst emergent situations. She has also been actively involved in architectural academics since the 2016 and has been consistently striving to redefine the relationship between theory and practice as mutually complementary. Tatiana Bilbao. Tatiana Bilbao is a Mexican architect with her projects spanning all across the globe. She began her studio in 2004 with the aim of integrating social values, collaboration, and sensitive design approaches to architectural work. Bilbao holds a recurring teaching position at Yale University School of Architecture and is taught at Harvard University GSD, AA Association in London, Columbia University, and many more. Neelkant Chaya. Professor Neelkant Chaya is an architect and academician who taught at the School of Architecture CEP. After having practiced and taught in Nairobi, he moved his base from Africa to India. He has been greatly interested in teaching architecture, and his practice is a reflection of his intensive involvement with the school. He has researched and worked extensively in the domain of architecture that is socially and technologically appropriate. And now for our panelists who will be sharing their projects with us this evening, MD Mashuk ul Alam. Joining us from Rajshahi, a town in Bangladesh, we have Mashuk ul Alam. He prefers transforming thoughts in some lines rather than 1,000 words. He takes a keen interest in exploring placemaking, human interactions, city-nature relationship, and wishes to pursue new urbanism. He perceives his interests as an outcome of liability and attachment with the place he was born in. Jai Asandaria. Jai Asandaria is currently an architect from Mumbai. He graduated from the Academy of Architecture Mumbai in 2019. He has been looking into his interests for phenomenon of mobility and has also been traveling curves towards architectural organisms, which he brings together with design as a resource. Harin Nayak. Harin Nayak is a final year student from SCET Surat. He believes in the power of architecture in shaping the lives of people and the environment. He strives to find creative design opportunities which achieve harmony between nature and humans through sustainable and environment-friendly spaces. Humaira Anand. Humaira Anand is a recent graduate from Bangladesh. Her understanding of what an architect does changed progressively as she was introduced to the architects transcending the common perception of their role. Consequently, her interest has grown in humanitarian architecture, participatory design, resilience, and socially responsible architecture. Radha Iyer. To Radha Iyer, architecture is simply anything that exists between the land and the sky. Every form of material within it triggers her question, and she's always curious to know more about it. Deriving meaning from life is one of the ways that she perceives and reads architecture. Today's session will be moderated by Uday Andhare, who is the design principal architect at Indigo Architects, a multidisciplinary practice based in Ahmedabad that he set up with partner Mausami Andhare in 1998. He has also been a visiting faculty in architecture, urban design, and the program in sustainable design at CEPT University, Ahmedabad. He strongly believes in a technicality approach and ecologically sensitive approach that weaves together threads of traditional wisdom into design, an approach which he believes can make architecture expressive and meaningful. Thank you all for joining us today from different parts and various time zones of the world. To give a brief outline of the session, the first half of today's session will be presentations by 5 student panelists, 10 minutes each, and a 2-minute break in between to clarify any doubts or raise any key questions. I would request everyone to abide by the time. The discussion will then be driven by the moderator and all the panelists. Further, it will be opened up to the attendees for questions and answers. I request the audience to ask questions in the Q&A tab of your Zoom window and to mention the panelist for which the question is addressed. When somebody's question gets selected, we will turn on your video and audio. So without further ado, I request our first panelist, Mashuk Al-Alam, to share their presentation.
Am I audible now?
Yes, Mashuk.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. I'm Mashukul Alam, a recent graduate from Buet, Bangladesh. I was selected under the sub-theme of human-nature conflict to share my final year project under this prospect. My project is Biodiversity, Pond-centric urbanism for increasing livability in Rajshahi city. Rajshahi is a divisional town and a growing metropolitan city in Bangladesh. It is also a center for administration, commerce, and education on the northern part of the country, situated on the bank of the river Padma. I took the city as a site of my project with an idea of saving it from alienation and social and environmental degradation due to the rapid and turbulent force of urbanization, and to derive a livable condition for the inhabitants. Well, the slide is freeze. Sorry. I'm sorry for taking the time. The slide was freeze. Okay. While studying the city, I came across an eminent feature of its urban morphology, which are the numerous ponds scattered around the city, as you can see in the satellite view of the older part of the city, which was the site for my study on a larger scale. To be specific, ponds are only source of urban open spaces proximate to urban natural environment that covers about 40% of the total urban void of the city. Actually, ponds are not natural phenomena. They are man-made structure within the city to hold water. The cohesion between land and water creates the most favorable condition for the ecology to bloom, and the microclimate created by the water body also draws people around. So a sense of place is already there because of the environmental behavior of the people towards water. That created pond-centric mohalla or neighborhood and urban culture of the city. Historically and contextually, ponds are the agent of resolution and medium of response to the perpetual human nature conflict of the city. At the outsetting of the city, the ponds were the source of pure drinking water and natural infrastructure, serving people's basic instinct and saving them from semi-arid climate of the region. When the city was declared divisional capital, They gain their socio-political importance as a symbol of power, charity, and utilitarian space, creating the image of the city. When urbanization and industrialization took place, they maintained the ecological balance and natural coexistence through the city with the help of cut and fill process. But later, with the advent of various alternatives to the surface water and hydrology, ponds were isolated from the urban fabric and infrastructure. The lack of conscious augmentation to adapt with the progressing social norms and cultures intercepted them socially from human life. So they turned into negative spaces and dump yards, coming to a conflictual position with the city. The aim of my project was uh, was to introduce an intrinsic urbanism for the city of Rajshahi, taking its pond-centric culture into account and conserve the living historical and natural environment. The objective was to turn the ponds into public urban spaces through placemaking by engaging people and incorporation of infrastructure. I think conflict is engendered by encounters. When the connection between the things is disturbed, it turns into conflict. So, in order to study any conflict and before coming to any responsive situation, this inherent connection is very important to study. So, in my project, I tried to analyze this disrupted connection between ponds and the city, and I found that ponds are connected to the city by two variables. They are social parameters and physical framework. Social parameter consists of the impact of the pond on different scales of the city, the functional aspects of the ponds, and accreditation of overall environmental quality. On the other hand, physical framework is a spatial pattern of the visually and physically connected places that consist of built form around the ponds and accessibility to it. Well, from the combination of these two variables, we get three interrelation metrics. Those are social parameter with social parameter with physical framework, and physical framework with physical framework. In details, the urban water ecological, infrastructural, and socio-economical functions are disseminated among users, neighborhood, and city scales. The physical, aquatic, natural, and social quality of a place depends largely on the five spatial pattern of the pond. And there lies a close connection between the three types of built form around the pond and the five types of accessibility to it. Then the existing SP matrix shows the area for different functions on different scales documented in photographs. The design matrix shows the functional upgradation on different scales. For example, as urban function, ponds can provide communal facilities to the users, or for the neighborhood, for gathering space for the neighborhood and thoroughfare experience on the city scale. The existing SPPF matrix shows the spaces that regulates physical, water, and natural and social qualities. The design matrix shows the guidelines taken from improving edge protection, storm water, and grey water separation, and spaces for green intervention and places for social interaction. And the existing PFPF matrix is the analysis of the interdependencies among the land, water, and built form. And the design matrix is the guideline for redesigning optionals for the alteration in forms to improve the interdependencies. Uh, yes. I think there is some problem with the slide. It isn't changing with the command. Well, then the design process is divided into three phases. First, design direction for town planning and master plan design for Old Town Rajshahi. It will be curated and carried by RDA, that stands for Rajshahi Development Association. The first row shows the present condition of the city with satellite view RMDP master plan till 2024 and the ward demarcation with position of ponds. The middle row shows the redesigned road network consisting of two-way primary roads, one-way shared residential street, and pedestrian green alley, following the existing network and destination points and landmarks. The bottom row shows the small, medium, and large scalar impact radius and area. It will be referenced to the further city planning.
I'm not sure if some kind of technical issues.
Yeah, I think there is some issues because my slide is not changing. Yes, I think it's open now. It's working now. Thank you. Well, sorry for the inconvenience. Well, this is the second phase of design. This is ward-based development plan curated by Rajshahi City Corporation. The red lines on the drawing shows the reclaimed setback areas from the frontage of properties for introducing hybrid zones and developed sidewalk zones for growing and nurturing the belongingness as well as ensuring safety and security through the amplification of public-private interaction in the streets. The gradient shows the small to large scale impact that will later determine the socio-cultural and economical linkage of the pond. And the conceptual section also show the implication of design matrices that I showed before on the side. This is the final stage of the design where the individual ponds of a ward is designed from city, neighborhood, and user scale, curated by the respective ward authority and the users themselves. So this is the first pond of the previous ward, and the design process with the final outcome is shown here. The emphasis was given to reestablish the social connectivity by improving legibility and conserving historical relics and creating public community spaces. The physical connection with the city is also reestablished, and an added geological and morphological changes on the temporal scale is shown. This is the design process of another pond of the ward. As you can see the process, and there was a good cadastral connection already. The idea of socio-economical upgradation and community participation is explored through placemaking. And the third pond of this ward is situated in a very dynamic node, and there is a proposal of a building a commercial space there. So how can a building be accommodated with the setting of a pond is shown, and the node is also designed but not neglecting but considering the pond as a vital element of urban design. Well, if the cities are imagined as a living organism, the natural identity of is a very biological part of them. Similarly, ponds in Rajshahi city holds the necessary fluid that brings the life of the city. So the process, as I designed the city from this very fundamental part, trying to derive human needs and city needs from it, and it can be referred as the term biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mashuk. We now have 2 minutes if the panelists have any other questions.
Question. How well do you know this city? Do you live there? Have you lived there? Have you spoken to interviewed the inhabitants? What contact have you had with the, I have to bring my video in, sorry. I have to, sorry, can you give me a little bit of background to your knowledge of the city?
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir. I am from that city actually, and it is my hometown, and I lived here for more than 15 years from my very childhood, and I'm so much connected with the city, and I have so much memories with the city and the pond also.
I wanted to just, I was very excited to see your presentation. My question is, can you explain all this in Bangla uh, um, to your relations and your friends in Rajshahi? One, and two, um, how do you? Uh, there is there is a need in our time. Anything that has value has to be permanent and privately owned. Now, ponds are not privately owned, as far as I know. There might be a few places, but how do you plan to deal with these two elements? You know, it's a public property, and um, mm, and a pond is also an impermanent structure because the level will go up and down with with the season. That's it.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, we could move on to the next presentation.
Because in the 2 minutes, you may not be able to explain this.
Yeah, we could carry the detailed discussions on the latter part of the session today. Thank you again, Master. I would request Jay to please start his presentation.
Am I audible? Hello? Am I
Yes.
audible? Okay.
Yes.
Uh, so as Mashuk rightly said about how this rapid urbanization and industrialization cause rapid change in urban fabrics that also lead to depletion of certain ecosystems in the city. One such is the story for the further continuation lies where the story of accumulation in the city, also known as landfills or black holes of the city, which are slowly and gradually trying to encroach the land as well. So in this topic, rebouncing the cycle of consumerism also tries to converse a story from waste to resource, says that everything in this world is a resource, nothing is a waste. Waste is just an illusion, such as like a letter or a word or a thought or a time is not a waste. All of these need right management, right location, and promote these regenerative properties of them. So in this sketch, we try to see when these objects are looked as a waste, they come together and form this and are compiled together on these landforms. And when the perception of resource is released in front of them, they try to get back into their functions in different versatile forms as well. The aim of the project is to rejuvenate the hidden landscape, which is like the green womb, the jungle, the lungs of the city that is hidden beyond these black holes by dissolving these black holes as well. And hence a project called as the MAD Lab, that is the Material Madness, Amusement and Consumerism Lab, is projected within the city, which tries to enable an opportunity to arrive at the perception of a resource rather than forcing one by its ability to regenerate and have a progressive timeline of the objects and play of fun within the project as well. The story starts with the decoding the mountain. So definitely this is a pseudo intervention by all the designers who have definitely designed the construction, but definitely there is a lack in a system where destruction is not designed. And hence they come back together and form this huge colossal structure of different materials and of different stories altogether. Now, further decoding the mountain, we also get to know that how these are raw materials for the further activities and formation of the products to happen, and how these are misplaced objects. For example, a tumbler from some other bathroom and from the buckets from some other place have come together and conversing with each other. And these are also the nothing but mines of the city where you can find these raw materials in order to carry out the further functional object production as well. Now, how did this happen? There's a short description of how the mechanism of the mountain was formed. Towards the right, we see that there is a cycle of consumerism where the man is stuck by his obsolescence of the cheese, where the continuous gear rotation of the work to earn more money, buy more, consume, and want more create this accumulation. The idea of the Mad Lab is to push these resources back to the cycle of the consumerism in order to generate the perception of a resource as well. So what does this we have to say to consumerism is that, oh dear cycle of consumerism, what have you done? Your each rotation oozes out the human energy, but only to fuse the accumulation of metals, of plastics, of paper, and many more. Being a cliff of emotions where they rise and fall again and again, making this wonderful human a rat lab running for his cheese of superficial happiness. So this cheese is nothing but the obsolescence created in every object, marinated with small upgradation in order to complete their market study and continue their market generation as well.
I just want to ask if the slides are changing in the order.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, thank you.
So in order to arrive at to arrive at the philosophy of this Mad Lab, there are certain programs that are called become the 5 elements of the program, namely consumerism, the philosophy of the structure; amusement, the feeling of the structure; rack picker.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jay, but I think you have to reshare your screen because we can see just one slide.
Okay. Now is it visible?
Yeah, this is perfect. We can see yours.
Yeah. So consumerism being again philosophy of the structure, amusement being the feeling of the missing feeling in the puzzle of the city fabric, which tells that which allows to convert the work as during the fun mode. Like there is no such thing of work when it becomes fun. So fun lets the work to happen of segregation and of the social cause that has to happen. The rat picker is the seed of derivation, which also plays an important role in the generation of a business model for the same, and human energy being a resourceful energy to the structure as well. Like how calories help to use these machines, and how calories help the movement of the following systems as well. Upcycle Baba being the principle behind the upcycle craftsmanship of the structure as well. So what happens in the structure in terms of activities is that first the segregation of these inorganic substances happen, then the remaking happen, then they're sent to upcycle market. Then there are also spaces where people could come together and are allowed to stay for a while and understand what is happening in this Mad Lab. And there's also a place for donation, like where people could give their own material that they have no further use, so they can apply to the Mad Lab and helps the Mad Lab, the construction of the Mad Lab itself. Further on coming down, we come to know that there are further categories of activities such as receiving, segregating, and distributing. Distribution happens in the workshops, festive online market, and there are all-time public spaces there that are ever growing as well. And after the donation happens of the objects, these objects help for the self-growth of the structure as well. So people feel their objects that they have delivered is resourcefully consumed and used by the Mad Lab in front of them. And further, to carry out these activities, there are habitable sculptures, informal markets, self-defined spaces, and how public contribution make these spaces are carried out. Further, a short study about the basic geometries and these habitable sculptures of different scales that are thrown as obsolescence can be come together and form the architecture as well, like testing the value of architecture from waste, of waste, and for waste, and architecture as a resource. So there are two voids, mainly cylindrical voids. These are the objects of fly and running stream. And there are the cuboidal voids that are the objects of continuing and traveling, which come together and form the story of Mad Lab as well. So this gives rise to the further storyboard of the Mad Lab, where there are different stories where how people come together, use human energy, and carry out the work, not only in terms of visual creation, but after that experience creation and how it takes place in their routine level as well. So just describing the belt of inverted Sirsasina Yoga is one of the story about here. There are these jet engine cows which have collected certain objects, and these people hang around, and with every rotation they are made to collect and segregate these objects as well. So this also creates fun part while working and brings them together, which consumerism has converted into an individualistic society rather than a community together. There is also one story of resourceful jump where there is a transparent beaker level up with different markings to get to know that how much of the objects have been upcycled, and so that when a person dives in to get them, and they could take away actually from the collected upcycled objects as well. So basically, how the system works, the total MATLAB works. Here is the introduction zone where people are introduced what is going to happen and how the procedure is going to be taken place. This is the first zone. The second zone is where there is a inlet of all these inorganic substances, and then they are segregated by using on the conveyor belts that are attached to hamster wheels, cycles, and treadmills as well. And they are segregated into further categories of the typology of the resources that are coming here. And then they fall into this zone called the contraction zone, made of different workshops where this upcycle procedure happens. And after that, they come back here to a collection zone where, for example, if any company wants their product which is come to the MATLAB and want to collect them, so they can collect it from here and they can take it back to their source as well. Here is the temple of craftsmen where people come with their object, and slowly this temple gets formed as well. There is a peripheral lane where flea markets as well as the upcycle markets are gonna take place as well. Here is the discharge from where the discharge trucks come and dump the inorganic waste from D1, D2, and D3 and D4. On further explanation, these are the pits where all the resources are being put into. This pits which is lifted by the hand cranes by the human calories. And to talk about how the story is narrated from left to right, this is the peripheral street where these flea markets are held up. Here is the metal maze as a landscape where ruptured metal pieces come together and form this maze. Here is the bowing section where how people use this as a workshop. There are these larger grids, semi-large grids, and very thin grids behind where people come together and form this container contraption and different contraption according to the philosophy that they abide by with the upcycling craft. Further, there is a VO contraption where sewage pipes are used and crafted together, where there could be decreasing and increasing in terms of their volumes as well. Here is the resourceful jump in which the objects are being placed. So final, to conclude that in this evolution and innovation process, Mr. Producer and Mr. Consumer, in their conversation, they have given rise to unused energy, unknown potential that have rescaped the land, which has led to the formation of the black holes. And designing a cycle of construction without destruction has given rise to these black holes. In order to solve this, definitely there are 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. But with the brotherhood of upcycle, the message of everything as a resource can be conveyed to at the source itself, and thereby reducing the cutting of the materials to form the black holes as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jay, for your presentation. We now have 2 minutes in case we have any questions or clarifications.
Jay, I have a quick question. Do you have a drawing where you sort of juxtapose or sort of place this entire thing within a waste mountain?
Like the current scenario is not juxtaposed in the mountain. It is placed within the city fabric in order for the better awareness. Because, for example, if someone is doing urban farming next to me is more effective than somebody's doing that farming 10 miles away from me. So in order to create that routine scenario, in order to get people an opportunity to have that amusement feeling, have that conflict within their routine, it is being placed within the city fabric. Right now,
okay, so this is based on the assumption that the waste is still getting dumped on the outskirts and it will be transported here to get recycled.
No, so there is already a collection of the waste as given. What this tries to do this, where this projected in the area, it collects the inorganic substances directly and it's brought directly to the mad lab, where the objects that are not biodegradable, here they are upcycled with the people's participation as well, in order to cut off the supply to the dumping grounds at the first stage.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, we could move on to
one small question.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
In this design, have you kept a particular space that you have seen in mind?
Sorry?
While designing this, have you kept in mind a particular place that you have seen and experienced?
There were the collages of the spaces that I have experienced to be kept in mind. There were some centers that I have visited, and also the case studies that I had done over some waste to energy plants as well, in order to have a conversation with them with respect to our locality, with respect to our country, how it behaves in terms of that. There were different spaces such as amusement parks. There were different spaces where these recycle centers happen. Again, waste to energy plants happen. So in order to combine them together was the idea to.
Thank you. I now request Harin to please share his screen so that we can go ahead with the third presentation.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, Harin, go ahead. Thank you.
And am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon. My thesis topic, livelihood-based housing design, case of indigenous craftsman communities of Northeast India. Craft in India is considered a traditional practice, typically passed through generations. It is a physical manifestation of design and an indispensable part of architectural history. Floods are regular and the most devastating among other climate-related disasters. They account more than 50% of all the climate-related disasters and around 60 to 70% of deaths in the country. The eastern state of Assam is known for its fine craftsmanship and for the great extents of natural hazards. The state's experience with flood is not unusual. It is affected every year in 3 to 4 waves of deluge. Assam was worst hit in 2019 after the floods of 1988. 9 out of 39 most flood-prone districts of the country are in Assam, and Dhubri tops the list with maximum poverty rate as compared to other districts. Asharakandi, known as the Terracotta Craft Village, is one such place located on the banks of River Gadadhar, around 14 kilometers from Dhubri city and in the low-lying plains of Brahmaputra River. The artists of the community migrated before independence from Pabna district, West Bengal, present-day Bangladesh. They have a 6-month of work cycle as the area experiences a lot of rain. So from this, the village came to be known as Asharakandi. Ashar meaning the monsoon month and Kandi meaning shedding of tears, as the artists are unable to work and have to bear huge loss every year. The community settled on the edge of the river due to ease of their transportation. But at the time of independence, lots of immigrants settled behind the community, leaving them no space for future expansions. So over the year, the community started to get affected by the floods, and they were forced to move away from their existing locations. The site has a gentle slope on all sides except the river edge. The houses on the river edge are the ones most affected due to floods. The other areas of the village are also affected, but due to heavy rains causing flash floods and surface runoffs from higher areas. The survey finding shows that the community is not satisfied with their existing living conditions, and as there is no space for future expansions, people tend to leave their family profession of pottery and move out of the village. The most important driving factor for this is the mismatch between the existing form and the continuously changing context. The beneficiary groups were divided into 3 zones depending upon the danger level from the flood, where the outermost zone, the zone 1, covers almost all the houses which fall in the river inundation area and get destroyed every year. The demarcated area for the development is around 700 meters away from the existing site. Due to its comparatively higher altitude, it will reduce the risk of flood caused by the river. The area is a gaucher land owned by the Gram Panchayat. The existing roads follows a very typical grid pattern where tertiary streets divide the area into multiple clusters. So the proposed road grid extends and imitates the existing pattern. The final road further shapes itself considering the natural contours of the area, giving it more organic form and making it a part of the existing village. The proposed master plans extends from the existing village in a way to be defined as one. The footpath defines the road edges by developing spaces for the activities to come over it. The external road and the community spine divides the area into small clusters. Now, each of these clusters is made up of 8 to 10 units staggered in a way to create pockets for pottery shops to come up and allow easy flow of air. The arrangement of the peripheral road and the internal streets encourages peripheral vehicular movement. The central spine connected with the walk trails encourage inward pedestrian movement. And the densification of activities is done on the basis of the activity hierarchy, where general shops and community buildings are on periphery, while the pottery shops are in front of the units. The proposed master plan aims to safeguard the community from future disasters and floods caused by the heavy rains. The site has a natural slope towards the water bodies. Using the natural flow of the rainwater, the green shallow areas are developed, which during monsoon would channelize the rainwater and surface runoff towards the water bodies. The green areas are developed using the cut and fill process, where the green areas are cut to form a detention channel and the earth is used for filling and leveling of the unit plots. These green areas are used as community fields to grow and maintain plants. The poker is plays a very significant role in the community, around which the activities spill out and act as a retention channel during monsoons, which will fulfill the water needs of the community during non-monsoon months. There are existing pokers and connections between them in the village as well, but they are either encroached by the people or are polluted due to toilet outlets. So extending the similar process of channelizing the rainwater to the pokers and using those channels as detention areas with the village master plan, it could help reduce the amount of flash floods and surface runoffs. Housing and its affordability are considered one of the greatest conflicts in themselves. The justification and evolution of the basic core house is based on 3 parameters. The way of living of the potter community gives the spaces and elements required. The technical aspects gives the specific location of those spaces on the grid. The economical aspects justifies the need of those basic spaces and the ones difficult to build. The plinth and the core consisting of the utility spaces, kitchen, and a room is built under government scheme. The self-help expansion is done by the people using the materials gathered from their existing unit to accomplish their basic space requirements. Once that is fulfilled, they have 2 options, either to upgrade the kacha construction or build an incremental space over the remaining grid. The housing units follows similar parameters as the vernacular units, but under a single roof, giving it a holistic identity. The different typologies are bifurcated on the basis of existing plot sizes, clan sizes, and their monthly income range. The self-help expansion area marks the instant requirement of space by some of these families to accommodate. The design aims to give the community a greater role in building their own home with multiple planning options, giving rise to unique and a diverse build form. Proper workspace and storage areas are designed to keep the terracotta art safe during monsoons, eliminating the loss of products and materials. Each element and space have its own significance and are derived from the way of living and the daily activities of the artist. Like the workspace is directly connected to the outer shop and the living area, generating easy movement. The extended plinth acts as a spill-out space from the rooms and living areas and also activates the space between the two units. The unbuilt incremental grid can be used for storing raw materials. The semi-monitor roof structure acts as a ventilating element as well as allow diffuse light into the unit. The materials are locally achieved or produced, like the locally grown bamboos, the bricks from nearby brick kilns, or even those bricks can be fired in the firing kilns of the owners itself. It also generates material options like replacing the GI corrugated sheet with bamboo corrugated sheet, using substitute materials or ones gathered from the old units for the construction of the extended spaces. Studying the behavior of the proposed unit under different weather conditions, considering a situation of extreme floods where the water level crosses the safety level of the plinth, the attic can be used to store the essentials, and even people can make their way to the roof through the attic in case of extreme emergencies. View of a flash flooded cluster during extreme rains. The cycle of self-sustainable, coordinated and integrated development, which takes into account the social, ecological, economical and physical factors. This creates a framework for empowering families and developing a true sense of community. The proposal uplifts the lifestyle of the community by giving them better living and working spaces, and also gives an opportunity for the craft person and the village fabric to grow and develop. So I would like to end my presentation by a quote by architect John Allen: crafts as a way of living tradition. Living traditions are like trees, and living tradition bearers are like the leaves that grow on the tree. Very so often, the leaves fall onto the ground, melting into the earth, their legacy feeding new growth from the tree. While tradition bearers come and go, the tree stands, grows, remains. Nurtured, it flourishes; neglected, it dies. Thank you.
Thank you, Harin. We now open up the 2 minutes for any questions or clarifications.
Yeah, Harin, may I ask a question? Why did the craftsmen originally locate on the river bank? Is there any connection with their craft, the terracotta, and their raw materials, which presumably is clay? Does clay come from that area? Does water come? They use water in that area. So I'm anxious to establish whether you need to be near the river in order to produce terracotta, and whether by moving them away from the river, you move them away from their means of production. That's
So the mud which they used was gathered from a nearby area. So it's close by the village. But the major reason of their settling exact next to the river was their ease of transportation, so that they can easily connect themselves to the other cities. So when they settled, the boats and the transportation through ships was the basic transportation which they used.
okay. I still worry about moving a community from one place to another where they're established. I do remember visiting Charles Correa's little village at Bellapur, and it was designed for craftsmen, and they were so far away from their market that they chose to let their houses to somebody else and then move back to the city because they're doing, I gather, move too far away from their traditional market. And I wondered if you'd taken that into consideration in locating the craftsmen to the northeast of their current place.
So the craftsmen are not located, they are not relocated somewhere else. They are just placed from one corner of the same village to the other part of that same village. So they are even continuously connected to the village market, but they are away from the river.
Okay.
Thank you. We can now move on to the next presentation. I'd request Myra to share her presentation.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, Myra.
Okay. Greetings everyone. I am Humayra Anand from Bangladesh University of Engineering Technology. Today I am going to share with you my thesis work titled Prefabricated Houses of Ghorehat in Munshiganj, Prospects of Innovative Upgradation and Scaling Up through DIY Adaptable Building. We often romanticize the dialectic tension between human and nature, and in the process we stay ignorant about the actual situation behind the scenic beauty. For example, at first glance, we may depict this scenario as a story of living with nature or perhaps a new beginning. But in reality, this is the story of an unfortunate family who lost everything in the event of river erosion and are starting their life from scratch. From the perspective of geological reality in Bangladesh, the misery of riverbank erosion comes up as inevitable. The endemic movement of our rivers, as this visualization reflects, result in damage and loss of crops, cattle, housing structures, and farmland. Bounded by two erosion-prone rivers, Munshiganj district of Bangladesh suffers from unavoidable scourge of riverbank erosion periodically. Many people remain under the spell of involuntary displacements and severe identity crisis over long periods of time. People here are routinely stripped of their physiological needs and face constant opposition against their motivation of creating belongingness. To coexist with this preconditioned crisis, local builders of Munshiganj came up with an indigenous response. Prefabricated portable wooden houses which can be dismantled and relocated at times of disaster. They realized that to arrive at an agreement with the moving landscape, the houses need to move too. These locally crafted houses are bought and sold as products in local markets known as Ghorer Hat, which can be translated as house market. Here, people choose from various displayed options, place an order, and then parts of the houses are delivered to their homestead and reassembled within 3 to 4 days. These prefabricated houses are selected as the setting for this research because to deal with the human nature disagreement, a local response already exists. I tried to understand and document the existing process and identify the emerging crisis from the existing local response. To imagine a way out of this crisis, I took the locally appropriated prefab system as an opportunity for value addition. The collective learning and design decisions are then documented in a manual. As an architect, my role here is a modifier, a mediator, and also an activator. This manual is the tangible outcome of this research, which acts as an interface, a mode of knowledge dissemination, a tool for social innovation. In the next part of my presentation, I will explain the documentation process of the existing system and then the contents of the proposed manual. When I started the survey of the house markets, one thing became very clear, that I have to unlearn my language and learn the local nomenclature for ease of communication with the local craftsmen and people. I started to familiarize myself with the steps of production and the assembly order of the house parts. Currently, the houses are being produced following house by house method. This is slowing down the current production rate and decreasing efficiency of the local industry. There are different types of products available in these house markets. I categorize the products into these 4 categories according to their volume and area. Each of them has a local name. For ease of discussion, I'm going to refer them as SML Excel. Their prices vary according to their sizes. During the survey, it became very evident that with the increasing price of timber, grassroots people are losing their affordability. On the other hand, the local builders are focusing on increasing profitability, which has resulted in a continuous lapse of quality. This is causing a steady loss of wealthy consumers. At this point, I realized that I need to investigate the dialogue shared between the local people and these houses to have a proper understanding of the context. Homestead survey revealed people's activity during river erosion and how these activities create variation in land ownership. During the homestead survey, four types of ownership were observed: resettlement, landowner, house rent, and land rent. For proper understanding of the existing situation, 50 dwelling units and adjacent neighborhood tissue were studied over a period of 4 months, and the findings are listed in this matrix. I found out that although these houses are accepted and cherished by people from all economic strata, people have different requirements and demands, which in most of the cases are not being met in the existing response. In this matrix, cross-referencing the ownership typology with the house size typology, the most in demand house size across all economic tiers is identified, which is the medium size house. Then the analysis of the medium size house is carried out to understand its sought after attributes and also to explore how the issues can be resolved. The issues will be explained in the design part. After keenly observing the existing situation, I explored the possibilities of applying do-it-yourself concept in the upgradation and upscaling process of the existing response. I derived an index called DIY index, which qualitatively measures the owner's participation in making a unit, a component, or joinery. During the survey, the owners and tenants were asked about their participation in the build process. Their varied responses were noted down using this index and arranged in this index DIY index table. By comparing these responses, existing DIY index of each component is developed. Analysis of their DIY scores indicates which components needs redesigning. After exploring various possibilities, a proposed DIY index score of the designed components is formulated. Thus, after studying the existing process and context over a period of 4 months, engaging with the local people in each step, communicating with the local businessmen, and learning from the local builders, a manual is produced. This manual is a collaborative response by the architect, the producers, the builders, and the users against the emerging crisis. The manual is penned using local nomenclature learned during the study phase. These are some of the sample pages from the manual. Emphasis has been given to keep the narrative as simple as possible with supporting graphics for ease of communication. Now I will explain the proposed system as it is sequenced in the manual. Let's start by the component and joinery design part. Firstly, the foundation is kept as it is. As for the structural components, in current process, they are fixed with nails and spikes. This damages the material and makes the assembly process harder. In the proposed system, the columns and beams are redesigned with a modified chidori joint, ensuring easy damage-free assembly and disassembly. In the existing system, individual floorboards are attached to the structure with countless nails, which make the disassembly process very time consuming. So in the proposed system, floorboards are redesigned as 4 feet by 4 feet panels, which locks itself in between the structural components. The long elevation of the existing designs need at least 4 to 5 people to move around and takes a lot of space in the moving vehicle, which is why in the proposed system, the walls are designed as 4 feet by 8 feet panels. This ensures easy handling and maneuverability, and the system becomes more flexible. The panels are categorized into wall panel, door panel, and window panels, which create further scope of customization for the users. Also, there are 3 types of windows proposed in the system, which can be placed according to users' need. This breaks the monotony of the existing elevation and creates exciting variation within the same framework. The roof is the most complicated part of this house because it is a large structure. For proper handling, roof parts are also imagined as panels. In the proposed system, which can be assembled by the users and pulled up to the top part by part. Then the parts can be fixed at the pre-cut angles. Arrangement of these components produces basic units. The basic design of basic units is kept proportionate to the existing space use dimensions. But addressing the need of grassroots people, a starter unit or transient shelter is proposed. This shelter is 12 feet by 12 feet in dimension and has all the basic attributes of all other basic units. It can be expanded into a small size house by adding another 12 feet by 12 feet unit. People can buy the additional components and expand at their pace. As for the material choice, a Bangladeshi invention named jute tin is proposed as the panelilfin and roofing material instead of plain CI sheet to increase the thermal comfort. Besides this, the material are kept as it is. Iron wood for structural components and locally available wood for floorboards and other components. But material exchangeability is ensured as the materials options will probably grow in the future. The design of basic units are as followed. The basic units follow the configuration of the existing SML-XL houses. Here is the small size unit. In the proposed system, an attic level is added, which is missing in the existing small sized houses. This will provide shelter from floods even in the small units. This is the medium sized units, and in all sized units, the components are needed are listed below. Then this is the large size unit, which provides more room. And lastly, the extra large size unit, which is actually a luxury product and provides the family to grow. The exciting addition in the proposed system is the scope of creating variation of basic units as shown in this table. The modules are designed with DIY aspect, but addressing and accepting that the owners will need professional help while building larger products. But the expansion, whether horizontal or vertical, can be carried out by the owners without professional help. In this ever-changing landscape, the proposed system needed to be capable of growth while preserving the key features. The adaptive aspect of the proposal allows the people to be responsive towards any impending threats. Here is a visualization of the proposed products being displayed at the Ghorer Hat. These house markets can also incorporate interactive models to help the businessmen better communicate with the buyers. So to summarize the process, the do-it-yourself concept has been explored to build up the local people's capacity and belongingness. Focus has been given to propose a system which can increase efficiency to local industry to empower the community. The proposed system aspires to maintain the cultural identity sought by its people and ensures scope of variety to address everyone's need of belongingness and growth. The manual will facilitate replication of the methodology in other similar conflict-affected areas. The collaborative response progresses with the collective vision of a dwelling that is of the people, for the people, and by the people. The vision is not the end product, but the beginning of a joint effort which can continue to reduce the flood and ravages of the Kirtinasha River. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Humaira. We now open up the discussion for 2 minutes if there are any clarifications or questions from the panelists.
Actually, the presentation is so clear that we don't need to ask questions. It's really very clear.
I have one question. I wonder, okay, I can't start my video. Start my video. I have one question. To what extent are the house plans culturally related? The problem with many affordable housing projects is that they're biased towards production methods rather than the cultural practice of the inhabitants. I see this in housing that's been built for the so-called Orang Asli, the Aboriginal people of East Malaysia and Peninsular Malaysia. To what extent are the plans culturally related in your in your housing project?
Sir, can you please rephrase the question? The connection is breaking, so I couldn't get the actual question.
The question is, the people come from a certain culture. To what extent does the industrialized process allow them to build a house which is related to their culture, or is it more related to the production methods that you have so adequately explained?
Okay. Okay. To answer that, sir, these houses are already part of these people's local culture. They have been living in these houses and buying in last 3 decades. So the plan or the spatial configuration of these houses, the existing houses, are already part of their culture. So what I did is take that dimensions and just modularized it, so the assembly and disassembly process becomes very efficient, and the production process also becomes efficient. So it is a win-win situation for all the stakeholders.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move forward to the fifth presentation. I would request Radha to share her screen.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, Radha.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. In the current scenario that we are today, I think what better than a global pandemic situation to be a part of a human nature conflict. As our world becomes increasingly divided into non-symmetrical realities, ideas of conflict and responsiveness towards it have become binary sets of oppositions. From times of seeing conflicts, it's interesting now to come to a time where conflict is starting to be assessed. So let me get into this process by first introducing you to this place I choose to demonstrate conflict. This would be through the sense of materiality and its experience in space in the case of a granite quarry. This is Sadrahalli, a granite quarry located in the outskirts of Bangalore. A quarry is a place that stays consistent and yet changes constantly. So is this a natural land where the material spreads and grows itself uncontrollably? Or is it a man-made land that can be shaped and sliced as required? On seeing such scapes, documenting them becomes almost impossible. In an attempt to negotiate with this nature of the site, specificity and detail of the entire site are worked out in a manner that they bring out sharp material experiences in the following visuals. However, the drawing here is used to only locate you in the field. Some things I believe can be only worked on site. Along with being a stark landscape, the place also starts opening out itself almost like a sci-fi land. The study from here takes a fictional narrative approach. A few of these visuals helped me in shaping my vision. The phenomenological triggers seen and the experiences during the walk on site helped me think of material possibilities and experiences that these places could start to be thought of to evolve. In the study, there is also an attempt to repurpose the idea of mining. The only value of this surreal landscape is its very act of mining. So the idea of mining should be encouraged such that excavations happen in a way that the very value of a space is kept intact. The quarry as a space itself develops as a granite garden here through 5 different spaces, each being carved with specific material characteristics through the act of mining. So now let me take you through each one of them. First is the node of texture construction. Here, granite gets dug out in a manner that it becomes a new ground for carrying another material over it. And on the other end, it also coexists in its very form with other materials. Thus, collectively, they become a texture. The same language is adopted here to construct the entire node. Second is the node of scooping and molding. Scooping in 3 dimensions here occurs such that it opens out a whole new ground. It opens out solid blocks as hollow spaces to see what's parallelly happening in the surrounding, and also where large chunks of granite could be carved out as a walkway to open out into other material worlds. In the process, the material also attains a quick contrasting characteristic of its own using this form of scooping. This hole or the new ground you see also sees material used as in a construction quality, and at the same time, by being treated, becomes a shiny object of visual aesthetic appeal. Moving on towards the node of additive material. Walking down the space unfolds material that are progressively discovered in each phase of mining. From steps with stone debris surfaces to a mid-landing of red mud soil, and further down to steps made with water. These steps in a way become an experiential trail of understanding the mining activity. Here comes the node of reflective solidity. The kind of mining adopted here is in the form of chiseling. Stone gets chiseled and polished to an extent that it attains a shiny reflective surface. Two glass pathways alongside are developed in a manner that one gradually sloping from the ground level would start going to an underground level. Further, the glass pathway gets reduced in its starkness quality by the presence of the glass pathway, making it a little lighter and more reflective. The other pathway that you see alongside happens at a level slightly above the ground. Here you celebrate reflection through the glass walkway and the water body below it. Moving finally to a node of contrasting fluidity and softness, it's almost like the ground starts getting thickened up here when the ground and its edges are cut or sliced. The sensorial qualities of water and glass make the material feel smoother than its otherwise surface level of roughness. On seeing these nodes being constructed, I look back to see the land and its evolution, where seeing these new conditions emerge, questions about ownership pop up in me. What is the idea of ownership that landscapes like these hold? What kind of audience are we addressing towards? Does land, a natural entity that belongs to no one, actually own the value of ownership? Shouldn't ideas pertinent to ownership in such cases be more of a collective identity than an individualistic idea? So, to this place that seems so functional as a quarry, to a place that was left abandoned after its fullest exploitation, or to a place that derives so many possibilities to trigger material experiences, I strongly feel the need for such kind of places to open out to people, for people to experience the space, and for people to debate on its existence after man's exhaustion with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Radha. We now have 2 minutes for any questions and clarifications.
Just a quick question. I lost connectivity in the first couple of minutes in your presentation. This you said is an abandoned mine, right? And
Yeah.
so how long has it been abandoned for?
I don't know if it's exactly abandoned, but the time I visited it, it was not functional for like half a year or so. So it's still under this confusion, like it's still under this conflict, I'd say, where there is a decision to take that should this land be abandoned or else further used in the way that it is currently. So it's still under that question mark that what has to happen.
I mean, one can still see a lot of rock over there for somebody. If somebody decides tomorrow to come and take it, it's there for the taking. Is it?
I like from that point of view, I'm not sure, but I think that like through the project or through the study, I feel like like developing it through excavating it for material growth or material exploration would be nice. Like you can't stop the act of excavation because such places are meant for its active mining. So I feel like rather than that, you carry on mining in such a way that the value of the quarry is still intact. So you can scoop it out in certain ways that you can still have triggers of material experiences having throughout.
So what you mean to say is that what you propose is that all of these things exist within a mining atmosphere.
I start to like, I'm not saying that these things should exist. I'm trying to say that these kind of experiences should start getting developed in a place that is so materially driven. So in case if scooping is always going to happen, why not see it happening from a materialist point of view where it's one material that's getting explored or dug. So why not see other material relationships with it, and also its own material, how it can be altered or modified using different qualities like polishing it or chiseling it, using its own characteristics, like what kind of qualities to come out of that.
I had one brief question. Excellent presentation, Radha. You mentioned something about having some norms before you start mining so that the place becomes useful when the extraction stops. Have you come across any norms for this anywhere in literature or in experience where a mining clearance depends upon thinking about what's going to happen to that place after you're done?
Honestly speaking, I've not come across any norms as such, and the time I visited it, it was already closed. There was actually no access from any of the ends. I just managed to get
So
in front.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Spend some time with mining people and try to devise a list. This is a very promising idea.
One question.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
One short question. I spent an hour trying to find this quarry on Google Maps, scanning all over Bengaluru and Maleswaram. Is it in the center of the urban area, or is it way out on the outskirts?
It's in the outskirts. It's in the outskirts.
Maybe I didn't look far enough out, but I spent such a long time trying to locate this this quarry. Never mind.
I would now like to hand over the mic to Uday sir to moderate the discussion further. Thank you.
Discussions that have unfolded in the course of the last few days, I cannot stress enough the intertwined nature of issues that bind the themes of this forum. Today's theme, human nature, brings into sharp focus this intrinsic relationship. Time, memory, and recall become important references for us to seek directions for the present and the future. How does the present allow us to imagine time as analogous to healing? While the act of engaging with the built habitat defines a conjoined cycle. What then is the language we must speak so that our dialogue with our environment is clear, thoughtful, and inclusive, so as not to see our relationship with nature as a binary? I contextualize some points borrowed from last night's discussions to ask how we compare the one-time act of building versus sustained cyclical engagements to repair, upgrade, and heal existing resources by creating a supportive, resilient layer entrusted to nature and its orders. Can there be a way to synergize this without the overarching dependence on technology alone? It is perhaps possible that interhuman relationship could itself provide the counterbalance to challenge the unequal consumption and commodification of nature. The environment is about invisible connections that we must recognize in order to engage with empathy and resolve. We know that a lake cannot be built by imagining water alone. In each of the projects that we have seen this evening, one observes an earnest intent to centralize the aspect of nature to improve the human condition. Through their representation, we see a variety of communicative approaches, documentation, and analysis to set up the inquiry that is indicative of practices of learning and the pedagogy that they have been exposed to. I commend and thank all the co-panelists for their work and their presentation. And I open this forum for discussion and fruitful exchange of thoughts.
them.
Sure. I'm unable to hear.
I make a start.
Sure.
Huh? I don't. I got notes on all of these 5 projects, but let me start with just one project. The first, the one that I looked at first, which didn't come first, but was it was called Rebounding the Cycle of Consumerism. The intention of the project appeared to be to recognize waste as a resource and to generate a built form from the recycling of waste. The use of human energy, strangely, with calories, and in the process to generate a sense of community and ultimately happiness. There are many individuals in India, I imagine, who are struggling to make a living at the very border of existence by recycling waste. They're equally quoted international companies who generate a large amount of money by recycling on an industrial scale. I can think of the recycling of toxic substances in computers, white goods, motor vehicles, ships, and the recycling of basic materials. So the notion of reuse of objects to create works of art is also interesting. I thought this dissertation thesis was really very, very well done in the sense that it opened up a new sort of language for discussing waste. The language at times I couldn't understand, I have to say. It was a sort of Orwellian language, a sort of language of the film Blade Runner. And some of the images, the first image that was presented could have come straight out of Blade Runner, I think. But I thought this was an interesting way to present the problem. Waste is created by an obsolescence of goods, and how can this waste be reused? So some of these slides had me baffled, to be honest. The use of the word cylindrical voids, objects that fly and move, cuboidal voids, containers, static and enfolding, and the places that were in tree, like metal maze, contraption M, weevo contraption, resourceful jump, thicket of chirps and temple of crafts, picking zones and juggling yards. So there was a certain poetry came into it all. It was not just about the architecture being explained in terms of architectural words, but it also gave a different slant to the whole idea of recycling waste. So, as I say, at times I was bemused and baffled and by some of the language, but I think at the end of the day, it is what most students' final thesis should do. It should engage you. It should make you aware of problems, and you should go away thinking. Not necessarily that there's a result at the end, which is a built form, but you should go away thinking about the problem. And I've always encouraged my students in final year, even if the final product is open to criticism because it doesn't meet the building regulations or it doesn't meet it doesn't meet a cost analysis, I want them to think. And I think this project, I'm only referring to this one, I've got other comments, but this is to start the ball rolling. I think this project got me thinking about recycling waste. In that sense, it was a plus point.
Chaya, I'd like to ask you a question on the notion of waste and what it means in the context of this particular project and the larger context of waste that we see. The layer of human engagement cannot be wished away in a way, but at the same time, we do sort of engage with the poetics and the imagination of the panelists' ability to kind of weave this series of contraptions to, engage. What I would like you to comment on is, what do you see in the cross section of such an idea?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to speak about the 5 projects together.
Okay.
Because I see 2 basic attitudes. First of all, I must say that compared to the previous 2 sessions, the conflict between humans and nature can be understood and the problem defined much more easily. If you're talking about time and memory, or you're talking about human, those conflicts are extremely complex and subtle. And it's not possible to define a problem that you are trying to solve. Whereas with the nature human conflict, one way of looking at it is to think of it as a problem that can be solved. And you apply science and technology on one side, and you combine science and technology with the human content. And if I look at both Jai's project and Radha's project, the primary platform is that you accept the fact that human beings are exploiters and human beings create a lot of problems. And you say, well, those problems are going to be there. We are going to have a consumer society. We are going to mine a lot. We are going to rape nature, but we will then compensate. How? By making it visible, but you will turn it into a recreational resource. You will not look at what are the health problems that are associated with waste picking or waste treatment. You will not look at the health problems which are related to mining, and silicosis is a big issue in all these mining. You will not look at the ecological impact of these. And by doing that, you create it into a kind of a enjoyable spectacle. I don't know whether these students are doing it as a kind of sarcastic device to bring our attention to this horrible stuff that's happening, or are they very seriously considering this to be the only way out? And that is despair. So there are projects, I feel, where the despair of the youth is already showing. But the other 3 projects, where there is a sense in which the humans are taken into account, to a slight extent, in Mashuk's project, there is a technicization, but otherwise, there is still a connection to that place. But in the other 2 projects, I must say, both Harin's project as well as Humaira's project, they have connected to people, not just to technology. And in that sense, those projects are projects of hope, in my view. What is also what I'd like to say about presentations of some of the participants is that you technologize thought. You make thought into tiny bits or components which are then assembled. So you first atomize the thought, then you assemble the thought, and then you operate the thought. And if you see the manner in which today's presentations happen, where you see a lot of small rectangles or squares, and leading into a kind of machine-like operation of thought. And I wonder whether there is any pain left. Is project of a work of architecture beginning in pain and sympathy, or is it beginning in the logical operations of thought? One of the problems of the consumer society is that it has said that there is no such thing as pain. You know, Buddha would have never been accepted in today's society. And there is only the rational solution to problems which we ourselves create. I would like to look at these 5 projects in that completed light. So I'm not answering your question directly, but I think that's enough said.
Yes, yes. I think it touches upon some of the things that were vital to put a perspective on the whole discussion here. I would keep it open for anybody else to take this further. Yeah, Tatiana.
Yeah, I could retake on that comment. I also believe that profoundly, we should start to think how to change the relationship to nature instead of, I think still, even thinking sensitive about it and responsible about it, it's still patronizing nature. And not, I would like to think that we could change the understanding of the relationship in exactly the contrary direction. So right now we're thinking that humans, we can do things for nature, even good or bad. I believe it should be the other way around. You know, nature regulates us. How can we relate? How can we enter this relationship understanding that domination? And not fighting against that domination. I think that by even trying to act responsible, we are patronizing that understanding and thinking that we could do anything. And I think it's a completely change of paradigm in relationship to nature. And I think it's very difficult to understand, because for us humans, it's very difficult to understand that possibility of someone else having power, no, having the domination of it, and beyond our possibility. And I think that that it is a very difficult imposition. But on the other hand, I think that there are paths. And for example, I believe that the project that Humayra presented is an incredible way of the understanding that you could insert yourself only in that process, in this case of her project, of the production of housing, that it already exists, that is what it's happening, you know, and understand how you can insert little solutions that would be creating a more interesting and positive circle, no, instead of a vicious cycle. No, she's speaking about changing the way the assembly is done and without nails in order to produce a more sustainable way of building directly, no, because you're not using nails. And so how can we insert ourselves in that cycle of nature, in that ecosystem, to really just enhance the possibility of that? And I believe that one way is to really place yourself in the position of the other, no? So it's that other, in this case, is nature. So how can we transform ourselves to become that?
May I?
That was a very
Yes.
insightful
Yes.
position.
Absolutely. And so this is something that I've been thinking about ever since, you know, the panel discussion started, and oftentimes this question comes up that, you know, why cannot a student take a stand to not do anything? Yeah? And I've really been thinking about this. So you know, I mean, just sort of trying to build it up, and I'll connect to actually what Professor Chaya said and to what Tatiana said to this, is that you know, architecture is as a training, as a field of training. So these, you know, 18-year-olds, they come into college and you start training for architecture, and you're learning everything. You're learning technology, you're learning sociology, you're learning humanities, you're learning philosophy, you're learning aesthetics, you're learning everything. And at the same time, it's not far away from you, because you connect immediately, because it's something that you've lived through all your life. You're 18-year-olds. You're not born yesterday, so you already know the world, and you know the world that you lived in is the world that you are getting to know. Yeah, and you're trying to formulate and so on. And 18-year-olds. They have this fire in their belly. They want to do something, and you see conflict in various kinds of ways. So, like somebody was speaking about how especially within the southern urbanism, you would be walking through these towns, the typical towns that's as they have become these ubiquitous grids, and within those grids, the islands with offsets, and these little things that have become like subjects of subjectivity, and which is what Raja used to call monkey business, because it's all becoming self-expression, and then from within that you get into a small village which the city has engulfed, and the fabric changes. But the technique of training in college, it allows you to enter into the grid, but it does not in a way allow you to enter into the fabric of the old town or the old village. You really do not know how that came up in actual formal terms. What was the code? What is the code that allows for an entire fabric to come up where each something is similar, but it's not, but it's not the same, where indeterminacy is built in, where contrary to actually what somebody, I don't know, I'm not that a scholar in that, but yet it acknowledges differences. At least it does not presuppose, equality, liberty, and so on that the grid proposes to offer, but does not. So there is this entire question that these students, they have this fire, but they do not have the technique to enter into another environment, and in that sense, I find Humaira's is an independent sort of a research to get into that code. Where does it come from? What does it do? Yeah, all of that, and it's not about the orthographic projections. It translates into that in terms of quantification, but all of these. So you look at Jay's project, and it almost feels as if he's unhappy with this world that he's living in. So then he goes and makes another world just like it. So it's I'm just trying to place it also from the perspective of the students.
Would Mashuk want to respond to that?
Yes.
I mean,
the
allegation.
He's
been
living there. It's not an allegation.
I'm just trying to be provocative here. Mashuk, do you understand the context in which you have worked, you have lived there? How do you see yourself connected? And after having designed this project, do you still belong there?
Sir, if I state like this, like that was past, like when at that time when the ponds were naturally connected to the city, it was working. But like when urbanization came, and the green portion or the blue portion was out of the city and gray portion come in, that actually changed the whole situation. And after that, the as I said, the ponds actually, or any natural element of the city or the natural identity of the city is decaying like this, uh, being kicked out or being neglected in that way. But if there was some kind of a conscious augmentation, that what we need today, what the city needs today, and if we can change the situation of that particular identity or particular nature that is with a conflictual situation now, and if we can turn it into some responsive situation that can support our needs today, then we can relate. I think, like ponds or any of the natural places, I would say, uh, was some place that we created our memories. But now, how we create our memories, like we just sit before our computers and we chat with our friends. But if we if we get some derivatives or some support that we need today from those places, those urban spaces or those natural spaces, I think we can relate, or the people can relate to that place. But there have to be some conscious augmentation.
Sopan, would you like to respond to the layers that comprise Mashuk's project and any other that excites you from your point of view?
First of all, can I also comment on all 5 of them
yes,
together?
Sure. I think that'll be fine. Yeah.
First things first, I really liked all 5. Right? It was nice to hear all this. Also, it's a refreshing experience to listen to people who are coming new into it, because a lot of us grew up in times when the environmental consciousness was seeping into educated people, whereas these are young people who've actually grown up with it. So it's interesting to see how they see it. And obviously it'll be different from the way we see it. All 5 of them talk about spaces that are difficult to imagine. 3 of them deal with land at the edge of water. 1 deals with a mining site that is abandoned. And 1 imagines a kind of dystopia that is walked straight out of a graphic novel and actually tries to make meaning out of something in extremely poetical language, out of something that everybody produces wastes. All our cities have these mounds of wastes, and we don't want to look at them. We don't want to look at abandoned mines. We don't want to consider spaces where land meets water, be it rivers or ponds. Now, I'm a journalist. I've been working for about 25 years on these subjects. So it's very easy for me to pick apart all of these proposals with, crush them with a brutal boot of reality. It's very easy for me to do that, because in some form or another, I've come across a lot of these problems. But the point here is that if we are to find solutions to these problems, we need new people to think afresh about them. And they are not going to sound very pretty or sorted out to us, because that is the nature of life. Life does not come about as a planning handout. It has its own dynamics. It's a world that we try to understand. Most of the time we can't. Some things we can gather out of it. So whatever comes out will come out through people like this. It's all 5 of them. It was good to look at the kind of effort that they'd made to understand space and spaces that are otherwise difficult to imagine. And it's really nice to see that all 5 of them are going towards spaces that most people don't imagine usually. Now, there are quick suggestions that I can make. I think Mashuk's presentation was very nice. One problem that most people have in imagining the kind of space that Mashuk was talking about is delta regions are very different from other places. Land and water is very impermanent there. So we have created governance systems which evaluate property based on their permanence and private ownership. Now, when he tries to do this, he'll have to deal with structures that came up in times when permanence was not valued like this. Because you can go around cursing the rivers of Bangladesh as much as you want. The fact remains that there would have been no Bangladesh without these rivers. It's these rivers which have brought the silt from the Himalaya, deposited it there, and created Bangladesh. You take away that those rivers and that silt, and Bangladesh is underwater before climate change. So how do you deal with that? And that brings you to something that Chayaji was talking about, social relations. So I know a lot of people who are trying to work on this throughout India, and their struggles are worth learning from. This is a very hard struggle because you're talking about encroachment, you're talking about pollution, you're talking about planning problems, and all these things happen in incremental ways. It's like, one drop per day. Encroachment happens 1 foot a month. But in 2 years' time, you suddenly realize a whole chunk of that water body is gone. So how will you negotiate that? Jai's piece, I mean, the amount of effort he put into this is fantastic. I was happy to know that he's actually gone and visited these places to figure out how to deal with this. But this will require a different kind of language when it comes to dealing with them. This is not to run down poetry. We all need poetry. The big things all result from poetry. But when it comes to actually doing it, it'll require creating a new language which changes value. Because language, after all, conveys the value of meaning. So you want to change value, you need to start by changing the language. So there it will be a practical problem. Harin, it was very nice, but when it comes to moving things, for example, I'd like to know what is the kind of clay that these craftsmen use? Is that clay at all linked to the kind of silt that comes down the river? Or do they have to go to another spot to gather the kind of clay that's useful for their craft? And this plan, how does it think through their raw material supply? Humaira, very well drafted, tight project, right? There is ample experience about when it comes to generating literature or any kind of communication that tries to get people to imagine a new way to build structures. It doesn't get across because there is a problem with the language. Again, people. And Radha, I just found it fascinating. And I think there is a brilliant idea there that if she, forget about this particular project, if she just takes out a little time, spends that time with at places where mining is happening right now, tries to understand it. I can connect her to miners in Bangalore if she wants, who will host her, who will take her around their sites. If she can work out a list of things that should be given out before mining sites are given away, so that they keep into account that once they are done using that place, they leave it in a way that is useful for the future. But the mining lobby, as we all know, is extremely powerful. It can always bend the rules to its own will. That doesn't mean Radha should just give up in disappointment. So yeah, I mean, here's clapping to all 5 of you. Well done.
The last point you raised about the quarry, I would like to open that question of regeneration to Tatiana, that the quarry opens up the possibility of slowing down and observing. And I think in Radha's project, we could sense that there was a sort of a hesitance to intervene. And it takes me back to another project which happened in the first session, which was the cannery in the coal mine, where the project was an insert to almost give the project a certain trusteeship of the coal mine to ensure that it takes care of it through its regeneration process and then engages with it. In this case, you see a project which is reticent, at the same time engages in small ways to, in a way, half-heartedly give back the quarry to the people. And I think the question about whether mining is still on or not is an open one. But I'd like Tatiana to respond to the idea of regeneration that comes to her mind about such situations and what it means in our relationship with nature.
Well, I really like the comment. I think it was Sopan who said that, asked if there was any literature on the possibility of thinking how to start a mine thinking on its future use. And I think that for me, that is one of the question that this project raises, no? And the possibility of nature taking back, no, that place that human has eroded. And I think that in a way, I also agree with Professor Chaya's comment on kind of the now the transformation of that space into a recreational space, which I'm not sure if we should intervene on that aspect. No, I think maybe the interesting thing is how to think that nature takes back its place in this area, and then, you know, in a way, kind of, if we think in ahead, how do we intervene this mind so nature can take over back again, would be an interesting response. And I think that in a way, we architects should start to think, how can we go a step back, no? Instead of understanding how to completely plan everything. I also think in the terms of the Matsu project, which is very interesting, no? Of thinking obviously in establishing and in a way formalizing, well, I don't like the word formalizing, but instead of like establishing the possibility of the ponds in the city in a very interesting way. I think that how can we leave the space for that to happen? No, how can we take care of our own responsibilities? No, in the case of mining would be mining, the fact of mining. No, and in the terms of ponding is how that we created the city that would prevent its the nature to form these ponds, no, and to exist. And I think that in the case, for example, of the housing project, that it's moved from the hills of the river. For me, also, what was very interesting is how to take in account the urban possibility, you know, of letting the nature live itself, but then imposing again a way of living, which is affecting more indirectly, but again to nature. No, so I would say that sometimes by, you know, understanding the problematic and trying to find another human made solution, we're still, you know, in this vicious circle that it's not breaking. So obviously I understand that there is one thing, no, we need to find the way of inserting ourselves in the ecosystem and building, because we have this necessity. No, I'm not saying that we should be humans and left to nature and just live under the capes. That's not how we can live, no? But how can we insert ourselves in the ecosystem and be part of it? I think that we are, there was a question in the audience, which I found also very interesting, which is, why do we have to think that there's a division between man and nature? And why do we have to think that man has to think how to sustainably act with towards nature, no? And how can we reverse that possibility by allowing this relationship to change?
There's this, I mean, you know, comparing rather, so what So Chaya said earlier that, you know, those two projects, Radha's and Jay's, were these sort of cases of the despondency in youth. But yet they are two very, very different kinds of responses. So what Uday sort of hinted earlier, that Radha's almost like this sort of a reticent kind of a response. That project was almost amongst the 15, I found that project to be almost the kind which said that I really don't know what to do, you know, and you know, so here it is. There is a mess that has happened, and what do I do here? And it just there are almost beginnings of saying that there are some kind of potentialities which I'm just going to, you know, there are just these surface kind of articulations which just let you reflect on it, just see what you have done. You know, it's not about so I maybe I'm wrong, maybe she should say that that's not how it is, but then I really think that the entire expansion and the insertion of the whole sci-fi kind of narrative happened almost by the pressure of making it into a final year project. You know, that you have to have that kind of a body, otherwise it's not big enough to kind of, you know, qualify or something like that. But there is this reticence that is really seen, where you just do a little bit and you really don't know what is going on. You know, it's almost in awe of the scale of the disaster that you perceive.
Can I ask a question to Robert? Yeah, go on, Radha. You would like to respond? Sorry.
Yeah, I think like it's really nice to see comments which are like really opposite or really different to which open up so much of ways that I myself maybe would have not thought about it. But I think that mainly what I wanted to achieve or maybe like strongly do is like be a part of uncertainty. I think as students, I think we have that leverage that even if we want to take up projects or we want to take up big questions or simple questions, I think it's important to uh, throw it out or be open about it and say that, you know, this is what I'm thinking and I don't know, like it's uncertain, but it's more important, I think, to talk more about uncertainties, because when something is so systematic and ordered, it's really nice, it's progress, but I think that every progress has to start from some uncertainty. So it's, I think in this way it's very important, it helps me to ask more good questions, simple questions for my own self. So I think, yeah, in terms of that, I feel really good about being uncertain in some ways. And as Chaya sir also said that I think like the project was like the intent was to make the project in a way that it triggers thoughts that what do people feel about the scape? Is it like exhaustion, or people feel that it's a new thought? I think I like this atmosphere that's being developed for the idea or as a whole about this thing. It's quite nice.
You know, in Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, when he's tired of working with the machines, his response to the machines is to break into dance.
Yeah. I have a question from Kashikar. And he says, this question of the technical and the poetic as a design approach to deal with human nature conflict makes me wonder about conflicts within the imagination of design. Is the technical necessarily rational and sharp, and the poetic inherently non-rigorous? These projects and others always seem to choose one or the other approach. Can this human nature conflict be addressed without both? And this is an open question to the panelists to respond to. I'm missing Chaya on the screen.
Isn't it take this?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it is possible to distinguish between the two in practice.
But also, I think Kashi has already pointed out what the road forward. So it's not really a question.
Yes.
What he's saying, I think, makes a lot of sense. Because every technical method may be based on distorted rationale. I mean, for making the atom bomb, you studied the atom, but ultimately you made the atom bomb. And in the same way, what seems to be moving in a straight line of rationality in technique will never be so value-free. And on the other side, the poetic is only a different language but I think we have to distinguish between poetic as the tragic. The tragic accepts the full content of reality and is transcended through human action. And and in opposition, the ironic. When you use the poetry to make ironic comments on reality, you are shying away from reality. And that's not really poetry. In the Indian aesthetic system, there is no irony is not accepted as one of the things. So I think that there is a distinctness to saying this is reality. Small things in it I might work on, and I might be able to change things a little bit. And I think that is where also Tatiana, when she's saying that if we allow nature to come back, what she's also saying is that the division does not exist. And that as Heidegger would have said, the worlding of the world keeps on worlding, if you get the sense of what I'm trying to say. But I think Kashi is absolutely right, that the division is something which is detrimental to a sane design process. Sanity requires that both of them exist in you simultaneously.
Today I was going to go in a slightly different direction on two of the projects. The biodiversity, pond-centric urbanism. It started with a project that centered upon biodiversity, but in the process it shifted to one about social space, about social interaction, about pedestrian movement, about community space and social hierarchies. In a sense, it lost its initial focus on biodiversity, and it became solely the human presence that was celebrated. What I mean to say is that at some stage in that presentation, there was a question of a comparative study of biodiversity, parks, trees, clean rivers, fish, wildlife, and so on. And yet it didn't, at the end of the process, we didn't go back to that starting point of biodiversity. And similarly with the Granite garden, which in all its magnificent forms, I thought it worked with natural materials to reveal beauty and strength. And it's create a so-called post-industrial playground. But I wonder whether it's a park in the sense of Shumi's Parc La Villette, simply a space in the city to be enjoyed where you may be able to go walking, to run, to climb, to swim, to cycle, and to meet. But will nature be allowed back into that park, or will it be curated? And I have a personal experience as I look out of my window here. Well, not tonight. It's dark now. But what I do is I look down onto a quarry, and a quarry where I 2 or 3 times a week I get on my mountain bike and I go and cycle around it. And what's a delight for me is that that quarry was originally a tin mine. Now I can pass lizards which are 1.5 meters long, great monitor lizards. They'll be crossing the path. There's a South American great iguana down there, which somebody has released because it got too big to keep as a pet. And there are terrapins, which are 400 millimeters in diameter. And I wonder to what extent, when considering these places like the regeneration of these ponds and the reuse of a quarry, to what extent we lose sight of the fact that nature brings with it many other things, not just a few trees and a few butterflies, but it brings a lot of other interesting aspects. And that's where nature and humans have to come into balance as well. Saying which, a cockroach is just run across my floor here, and I wondered whether to go and swat it or to sit here and just let it go. It's another question in the working through these questions of human nature and the contract we have with nature.
Yeah, I mean, nature also brings earthquakes.
Yes.
And just to add to something that Chayaji was saying, Indian aesthetics also does not separate tragedy from comedy. Both the elements are enacted together in the same play. There is no separation of this is a tragedy. There's no trilogy of tragedies which is followed by one comedy to just, then polish off the mood before the audience goes back home. It goes together. Tragedy and comedy are part of the same play.
I would like to shift our focus to one question that Tatiana has been, reviewing in her own practice, and that is about the design process and the role of representation and computer graphics and how we grapple with these. I'd also like to connect that question with what Chaya pointed out in Mashuk's presentation about the atomization of the idea. We see a series of arrays and grids and graphs and data. The computer allows us to multiply a diagram and infuse it with little tweaks of what begin to make sense. But does that contribute, to the enrichment of the process itself? And how does one see this in the context of what we see across time, learning, teaching, representation, understanding, and what really is the process of enrichment in this? And I would like the students to, the panelists, the sub-panelists to also act on this, but Tatiana first.
No, I think the panelists should be first, the students. We have heard them.
Sure.
Very...
So I would ask Humaira to take this question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is, the technical aspects are also necessary. They allow us to actually see the nature like we haven't before. So in some cases for us, there are places that do not exist uh, as the same timeline as we exist. So, and also the for the future generation, it will be this case much more severe. So the technical inventions or the technical supports are actually necessary to envision that what it used to be. If we try to understand the human nature relationship, or why the human nature conflict is being made, and also it is necessary to atomize the thoughts and to get into the little details that why something happened, how it happened, and how am rethink this situation, or what should be my contribution to this. To understand this, we need to actually go to the bottom part, or go to the littlest part of the problem. So it helps us. It does not take over, it should not take over all of the process, because also the nature part of it. So eh, what I think is technological inventions are enabling us to understand the nature in a way we could not, because we did not get that opportunity. So if we use that and use our thinking of the space, how we see it and how we want to see it, then it can become a great collaboration of the imagination and the past. Thank you.
Do any of the, yeah, Mashuk, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, sir. I would like to recall something that Yangel said, that we today we know many things about uh, how tigers or animals or panda in China live, but we know very little about how human life should be. Something like that was his quote. By this, he wanted to tell that actually we know very little about our own residence or the way of living. So I think what I tried to bring in my project, or the thought was like this, that in biodiversity that we write with S, is the diverse situation where the flora and fauna, the all the plants and animals live. But we also live in a diversity, like there are hundreds of people, we all are different from all one another, and we need different type, we have different type of needs. And uh, like uh, in the same time, the space or the environment we live, that have some need also that should be fulfilled by us. So these are the idea of my biodiversity with C, like all the needs that animals and plants can fulfill from their nature, the human can also fulfill their needs, and the city can also meet their needs from this type of design or this type of idea.
Also,
And
sorry to interrupt you. I'd like to kind of do a little course correction here, where I would like to understand that in the beautiful analytical diagrams and the positioning of the cross sections and the studies that you did, um, you know, there was a lot of data that was processed, and it was uh, assembled together to convey and present your idea across. But the design process, really, I mean, I can imagine you, thinking and sitting and trying to wonder how to go about this and drawing. And do you think that this becomes an alternative to drawing? And if so, I'd like to understand how one deals with this, because representation and data and thinking and intuitive aspects of the design process are quite different, I think. Do you agree or not?
There
Yeah.
might be a sort of desire or an answer to what the educational system demands, that you have to justify what you are doing.
Yes.
And one of the ways of justifying is to have these crisp diagrams of logic. Whether if at close, if you really study it, whether that logic works or not, or whether the largest question is answered by that logic or not, you can put away. And the system is satisfied that you have justified what you're doing. So the student does that in order to beat the system. But there is a student working inside who is full of love for that town, or is full of love for the way in which the people build their own houses using a system, but only wants to help improve it. And so I think there is a sort of split personality here of, needing to justify and wanting to do. And the two are happily coming together in these two projects, I would say.
Thank you, Chad. That was wonderful.
Maybe we rationalize too much. That's what I just thinking, no? And maybe a necessity for me, at least, is to let it go, no? To let it happen, just to spontaneously let it happen. Maybe that is the importance here.
Yes, and I think Kunjan, I would like to sort of get you into the conversation on what and how does one identify these anchors which allow you to hold on to the things that are essential and not getting entangled in the processes that are not necessary. So from your perspective, how do you sort of, what would you tell Mashuk?
I think he already has the anchors, and those I think are already. I mean, they are built in. They are within us. And what training does is to hone these. Is to make us sure about this is where I'm coming from and that is where I'm headed. So it just gives us more surety. So these foundation years, so to say. So like earlier when we were discussing, I mean, when I was trying to hint at what Professor Chaya just said about it's the necessity of the technique that has us draw plans, sections, orthographic projections, has us analyze data in a certain way, has us produce renderings in a certain way, but at the same time, your intentions are lying elsewhere, and that is where the mismatch happens. I think it's the same question about what are the distractions and what are your anchors. So there was this talk where I was talking about the academic work to someone, and it's a bit of a detour to an answer. But this person said that you remember how when we were studying and Barki would teach Corbusier, he would not teach Rochon. So it sort of remains with me as your foundations have to be about normatives, have to be about normatives that are imbued with real meaning, with contextual meaning, and the rest of the navigation will happen because life happens, life unfolds, and there is huge amounts of uncertainty. But I think that's why these college years, I think these guys are already quite anchored that way.
Thank you. Any other points anybody wants to discuss? And
are you getting ready to wrap up, Uday?
No, not yet. Not yet.
I just wanted to say what an amazing experience it's been to be invited to your annual colloquium. It's an experience I've not had quite the same sort of thing before. This interaction between the final year students, the graduates, and between them and academia, the academics. it's a remarkably high-level discussion, which I've been really proud to be part of that. I think the 5 projects addressed in different situations where, when one, nature is overwhelmed by waste created by humanity, and 2 more, nature's been exploited by humans, as in the extraction of clay for brick making and stone in the Granite garden. And in the other 2, nature has created problems for the humanity, as in the flooding and erosion of riverbanks and so on. But the 5 students, I think, have done a marvelous job in identifying the conflict in these situations. And with varying degrees of success, they've explored possible future trajectories. And I think that's a great, great way to leave it, where it's
we're still on. Yeah, I think that's a very nice summation, but we're not done yet, Robert. And I have a few more questions.
Oh, all right.
Them coming in. So
I'm just looking at my. I'm 2 hours ahead of you.
Yeah. I would like to ask you, Robert, that through your research in typology and vernacular dwellings in Southeast Asia,
what in Southeast Asia?
The study of dwellings and houses in Southeast Asia, and the manner in which the type in Humaira's project, the assemblage of the building as an object that can be disassembled and moved in the event of erosion. Have you encountered any of these typologies in your studies? And if so, what variation could she have brought in through an understanding of what is outside of her own environment?
Yeah. I haven't. And I've written a dozen books on houses in Philippines, in Thailand, Indonesia. It was all sparked by a conference that I went to in Zanzibar about 1978 or something like that. It was an Aga Khan conference on the architecture of housing. And one of the people there, it may have been Charles Correa even, who said that that the houses of the rich generally conveyed culture. It was an idea that was contested, and somebody else said it's not the houses of the rich that convey changes in culture. You should start at the bottom end, because very often it's the houses of the very, very poor that convey changes in culture. It set me off on a series of studies of housing in Southeast Asia, but I unfortunately tended to be nearly always landed property and not the houses of the very poor. And I've often said, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do it again. And yet publisher comes along and there I go off to Indonesia and do it. I've actually just started doing a book where where the title is Terrace Transformations in the Tropics. And it's actually, there's people who cannot afford landed property very often start with a terrace house. And these are very common. It's a very common typology throughout Southeast Asia. Terrace houses, maybe 17 feet wide, maybe 16 feet wide, sometimes 40 or 50 feet deep. And what's happening now is that younger people, it's remarkable how many architects are doing this, are acquiring these houses and remodeling them so that in the past they only got light and ventilation from the front and the rear, and they're changing the sectional diagram to encourage the Venturi effect, where wind is drawn through the house. They're putting in light wells so that daylight comes into the center of the house. And more important, they're not more important, but equally important, they're creating gardens front and rear and getting a connection to nature. And I'm very interested in that typology. But to be honest, I haven't come across houses which you can pick up and move, which was the one that demonstrated with the last presentation. I realize there are such houses. In Indonesia, there are such houses, but no, I couldn't tell you where to find any of those other than in Indonesia, where certainly sometimes a house is picked up by a whole village, a community. 40 or 50 people will put poles underneath it and they'll move their house from one place to another. Can be done.
Tatiana, would you like to go back to that earlier question which I had raised, which you, would you like to go back to the question on the design process and the role explained by Mashuk and some others?
Well, I believe that what I said in the beginning is that we should try to understand how to place ourselves in that relationship, and that begins within the design process. No, I think that maybe we might have to unlearn what we have learned to create a different possibility. No, I think that right now we have almost, well, or it's at least what I think, that I have reached the limit into the possibilities, no? And with what I know and with the tools that I have. And therefore, I think that I am right now in the process of unlearning and of trying to find new tools for imagining possibilities. No, as I said in a small and short comment, I think that we have this tendency, maybe it's part of our human nature, of rationalizing everything. And I wish to go back and unrationalize the process, and I don't know if that would allow us to arrive to a different result. That's something that we have to still experiment, or at least I do have to still experiment, and stop, going into this path that we are all our automatic path, of designing. We have entered into a way that we even don't question the idea of thinking that we need to understand the place, disassemble or assemble the program and the function and the respond to the square meters and the costs, the technical solutions, the cultural impositions, blah blah blah, and I don't know exactly. I mean, for me, it's still a very open question. This is why probably I wanted to hear the students to see if they had more responses, because normally they have more ideas. But I think that asking those questions right now is where we should start. We should be there, no? And maybe there are no immediate answers, and maybe there never are, and maybe hopefully we stop looking for answers, no? And ask ourselves more questions on everything.
Thank you.
Specifically in the process of design.
I would invite any closing remarks from the panelists and the co-panelists, and then we conclude today's session. Yes,
I wanted to add something.
Humaira.
Yeah.
And Radha.
Yeah. So first of all, this has been a great experience to learn about the views of the panelists about our projects, and also to learn more about our co-panels project. So I wanted to add to the answer of the question that is there any other example of this kind of moving or mobile houses? The answer is that in even the context of Bangladesh, it is a very unique example. And the motivation behind choosing this project was that people need to learn about it, that this kind of local industry, using the local people and the local building up the local builders expertise is happening in our country. And the and that's why the outcome or the manual was designed to be used as an interface which can be parallelly shared between different contexts facing the same conflict, and to actually tailor the methodology to their needs. And the and I want to add that the affordability issue of is that after the conflict of human and nature comes the conflict of human and human, and all the sub themes are actually connected, as this is the last sub theme curated discussion. With this, it's more clear to us that how all the sub themes are connected and how the narratives are shared. So the affordability issue, how can we actually look at it at the point of equality or equity, because how an architect can play a role in that situation. I want to raise this question. And in my case, in the case of my project, uh, this was a unique case that this cultural identity is sought after by equally by the rich people and by the people who are less unfortunate. But in other cases, there are this unshared vision of what my ideal house will be, and this creates the affordability issue, for which the rural people who used to build their house with natural elements are now building their house with less sustainable materials, and the cultural identity is changing. So what should an architect uh, what should an architect do in this kind of situation? How can they insert themselves? This is the question I want to raise. Thank you.
Would somebody wish to take this question up?
I have a very simple response. An architect is a human being. The better question to ask is, what should you do as a human being? And your skills as an architect will then come into play. You're not interacting with them. You're not God. You're just another one of them. So when you talk to them, when you deal with them, your skills as an architect will come into play after you improve your conversations with them.
It's interesting. When I was looking at Sopan's work, his compilation of this book, beautifully written Jal Thal Mal, in which he talks about how he did not have the adequate words to define and write about this in English. And he so goes back to Gandhi Shanti Pratishthan to begin to put together this book, which is incredible. And it also goes back to what Tatiana says about how do we speak to nature and what is the interaction or the dialogue that we need to establish with nature in asking the right questions. And I think both the aspects connect at different levels and scales. And to me, I think that is a very profound point at which both our panelists have engaged with the question of who are you in the act of asking the right question, and because in the manner that you ask the question, you expect a response which is equally compassionate, and then there becomes this exchange which can lead to something very meaningful and beautiful. And I could not help being reminded of these two connections between the two panelists that are on with us today.
I can make a small addition for all five of them. There are little things that I learned. My work, I'm a journalist. So I essentially write about what I go and see. I write about people I meet. So I realize there are a few essential elements of people who do wonderful work. One, they're not looking for models. And they don't talk about models. Right? Two, their relationship with their area is direct. They've not been funded by somebody to investigate something. They're not doing a PhD. It's not a research project for which they'll get a degree. Their relationship with the land, water, people living there is direct. It's what Chayaji said earlier about pain, right? The pain of one can be sensed by the other. And the third thing is when the relationship is direct and you're not looking for models, you find solutions that are specific to that place, time and place, and people. There's no theory for it. And that's the main thing about nature. There is no theory to nature. If there is one, we don't know it. Nature works in all kinds of complex ways. And we are one of the projects of nature. We are not against nature. Even if we destroy everything around us, that is also nature at work. Unless we think that we are supernatural, right? We are also creations of nature. If we are destroying something, that means nature does create a certain degree of self-destructive force. So here the conflict is, it's exactly what Humaira said. You know, it's not man's conflict with human conflict with nature. It's human conflict with humans. That's all. Nature is inherently a part of it. Once we learn to talk to each other in more sensible ways, the rest of it tends to fall in line. But it's not that easy to find good ways to talk to each other. Which is why I was constantly, a lot of my comments and questions were about language. That, you know, Mashuk, he's done fantastic work, but will he be able to discuss all this in Bangla with people who live in Rajshahi? His friends, his family, his relations, that's important. The success of what he wants to do will be ultimately determined by how he talks to his people, right? Likewise, the fantastic comic novel scale project that Jay has created, right? It was very impressive by all means. But when it comes to actually doing it, it'll depend on how you talk to rat pickers, how you talk to contractors who deal with rat pickers, how you deal with waste to energy plants, and how they tend to switch off their pollution curtailing equipment when they're actually operating. So all of that is very practical stuff. You know, if it's mining, how do you talk to a mining contractor who's constantly looking to cut down the cost? How do you get them to agree on increasing their cost so that when they abandon that mine, it is of another use? Now, there is no formula for this. If Radha does this, she'll have to work this out on her own. And her love for uncertainty will be extremely useful, because the one thing we didn't discuss in this panel today is climate change, which is going to introduce us to all manner of uncertainties that we haven't accounted for.
Yeah.
Right? It is applicable to everybody who's working in Bangladesh. It's applicable to Harin's project in Assam. Right? It is linked with everything. And within 10 years, we've got time till 2030 is what IPCC says. And there is no reason that we're going to change the way we are going till 2030. So then how do we cope with it? which means we have to keep a lot of room for uncertainties, right? And which is why all that I know, it might offer some useful things to these 5 young people who have interesting ideas, who worked hard to make their projects. Ultimately, it will be their doing, right? They will figure it out. Our hope lies in this evening, our hope lies in these 5.
That's well said. That's very well said. Thank you. And Shaya, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. No, actually, you know, the students must have got an impression that I am a real tough nut. Not only in this one, but in the earlier 2 also. So I must clarify, which I wanted to do on the first day, but there was no time, that the forum's intention is to critique the academic institution and not to criticize the student. When we are talking here, we are not talking about your work, which you have done. I mean, you've been selected out of a huge number of entries, and all these projects are wonderful projects. But they say 2 things. One is, how is the educational institution running? What are the priorities that it is pushing? One project is that. And the other is, what are the currents in society which we might want to correct, or which we might want to start discussing, which all the young people are swept off by. And should we remind them about something? These are the only 2 things. Your projects are wonderful. And I feel very happy that I've been able to see 15 projects of a high value. Today 5, and earlier 10 other projects. And I think also it has been a great, wonderful thing to be with Robert, with Sopan, with Tatiana, and with all the other panelists, because I think Robert is 100% right. I haven't seen this level of discussion in an academic forum about final year projects. And it's really a pleasure to be part of it. Thank you.
Correct.
That's very well said. I think we've come to the end of the session, time-wise and otherwise. And I'm extremely happy to have been part of this session with all the panelists, and on behalf of the entire KVDF team, which is working with all of us here, I'd like to say good night to all of you. And we look forward to the detox session tomorrow and the conclusion of this forum, where the summation of the issues and the discussions will happen, which I think would be a very interesting day. Thank you so much for your insights, and have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Good day.
I'm sorry, Robert, about that. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Good night, sleep. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. And have a good end of day and day.
Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us this evening. Indeed, there were very insightful and enriching discussions, which I think are going to stay with us for a long time, and we're going to keep coming back to this. So thank you all once again for being a part of it and for joining us. Please visit our website for any further details and schedules, and do join us tomorrow for the detox session at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the KVDF team, I would like to just extend a great thanks to everyone again for being a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.